Oh my God, Watchtower actually admitted they did something wrong. You ready? Let's get into it.
Well, we don't have to guess what the year 1975 means. If we read the Watchtower, because the Watchtower has been very explicit.
All right. That was a little clickbaity because they did admit to doing something wrong and getting something wrong in 1972. There's an article in the November 1972 Watchtower, November 1st, be big enough to admit a mistake. Now, in this article, they do admit to getting something wrong, but they also justify it, and they also do not take their own advice about what you should do when you make a mistake. So we're going to go through this article and point out the wild hypocrisy in the way Watchtower handles all of the many mistakes they've made and all the failed prophecies they've made and all of the harm that they've caused that they never apologized for, while giving excellent advice about how you should admit your mistakes, you should apologize, and you should make amends in this article. Now, while we go through it, another thing I want you to pay attention to is the language used in the 1972 Watchtower. The modern Watchtower is extremely simplistic. The reading level is very low in modern Watchtower publications. But in 1972, the reading level was significantly higher, so pay attention to that too. We all stumble many times. If anyone does not stumble in word, this one is a perfect man, able to bridle also his whole body. Thus wrote a leading Christian in Jerusalem more than 9 centuries ago. And is there any gainsaying his words? Of course not. Now, of course, what the Watchtower says here is true. People make mistakes. It happens. It does. And anyone who never makes any mistakes would be perfect, and none of us are that. So it's all right. Then it says, stumble is just another word for making a mistake. And though we all make mistakes, how difficult it is to admit making one. It goes against one's pride. Does it now? What does the Bible say about pride? Pride is before a crash. I think that's how it says it in Proverbs, isn't it? When one is charged with making a mistake, one is prone to want to justify oneself, to make excuses, to shift blame onto others, or to deny having made the mistake. It takes bigness to admit a mistake, to shoulder the blame, to admit that one has been wrong or used poor judgment. Okay, so let's get into this paragraph because this is where the meat really begins, right? And this is not the milk, this is the meat. We all make mistakes. It's difficult to admit making them. That's true. It hurts the pride, it hurts the ego, but as Christians, Jehovah's Witnesses are not supposed to be prideful, and the governing body and the leadership in the Watchtower certainly should be shining examples of not being prideful, and yet they never admit their mistakes. Notice this example, it says that when one is charged with making a mistake, one is prone to justify oneself. How does Watchtower justify its mistakes? New light. It's not really a mistake. We just got new light from God. And it clarified, we have an adjustment, all the different language that Watchtower uses to explain away the fact that they've completely changed a doctrine in one way or another. It also says to make excuses, to shift blame onto others. You remember that video a couple of years ago where Watchtower was shifting the blame of their 1975 end of the world prediction onto Jehovah's Witnesses?
You see, back then, some were looking to a certain date as signifying the end of this old system of things.
Well, some brothers thought blah, blah, blah. No, you very, very strongly indicated in 1975 was the end.
But the big question is this. Is this year 1975 the final year, the last year before the Great Tribulation breaks and reaches its climax in the battle of the great day of God the Almighty at Armageddon? And at sundown on September the 5th, the lunar year 1975 ends. So you see, we haven't got much left to this year 1975. going to end at sundown of September the 5th. And that immediately after September the 5th, why the millennial kingdom of the Lord Jesus Christ must begin in order to fulfill the final 1,000 years of God's great seventh creative day. And they're expecting the great tribulation to occur and the destruction of Babylon the Great and the annihilation of all the political systems of this world, and then the binding of Satan and his demons and their abyssing to occur before this year is ended.
Well, we don't have to guess what the year 1975 means. If we read the Watchtower, because the Watchtower has been very explicit as to what the year 1975 means for us. When God will bring the battle of Armageddon and clean this old earth off, and you'll be ushered right into a paradise earth forevermore, never again to be afflicted with this satanic old system of things. It will be gone down.
Stay alive till 75. 75 came and went. No end came. And you never admitted to making the mistake. And now that people know about it, once people started to learn about that, because you know what? I didn't even know about 1975 when I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I didn't know they had ever made that prediction because I was born in 77. So I didn't know there was a thing. I didn't know a lot of people left the religion because it failed. I didn't know because they didn't talk about it. They didn't want to bring it up. They didn't want you to know about their mistakes because of their pride, which they just said is a bad idea to be prideful. So I didn't know. But then came the internet, and then came the activists for EXJWs, right? Who made it clear from the Watchtower's own literature that they did in fact indicate 1975 was going to be the end of the world, Armageddon, all of that. So Watchtower had to respond to this because Jehovah's Witnesses use the internet. Google, YouTube, other platforms use creepy big data to know what you're interested in and what you're into. And they can see in your data if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses. This person is one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So they might be interested in this video about Jehovah's Witnesses that talks about 1975. And so witnesses see this stuff. Some witnesses have family members who leave and then tell them about it because not all of Jehovah's Witnesses are hardcore in the act of shunning the people who leave, especially if they're not really combative or argumentative. They might not. And other people have family that have never been witnesses, so they don't have to shun them. And those people will watch EXJW videos and bring this stuff up to the witnesses. So lots and lots of people started to realize, Watchtower used to predict that 1975 was the end of the world. Jehovah's Witnesses didn't know that, but now they do. So Watchtower had to respond to that. So they made a video blaming a few brothers and sisters who supposedly spread that rumor, or however they worded it. I'll show a clip. Rather than just admitting, no, they were wrong. You made a mistake, but you didn't own it, right? You shifted the blame onto others, which you're saying right here in this article from 1972. Excellent article, by the way. Wonderful advice that you shouldn't do. And it also says, or deny having made the mistake, which is part of that covering it up and acting like it never happened, right? That's a kind of denial, isn't it? When you pretend nothing ever happened, but it did. Then it says it takes bigness to admit a mistake. That's interesting. Bigness. That's not how we talk today, but 1972, a little different language. Well, apparently Watchtower's not big. They don't shoulder the blame, like it says here, and they don't admit that they were wrong or use poor judgment because, okay, you used poor judgment. You were wrong about 1975 and 1914 and 1925 and 1951 and this generation not passing away before all these things occur and the preaching work ending by the year 2000. You're wrong about all those things. You use poor judgment in trying to predict a date. When didn't Jesus say that you would not know the day or the hour when he was returning? Isn't that what he said? Yeah. But you ignored that and you wanted to predict anyway. You're wrong. You use poor judgment, but you don't admit it. Let's move on. At times, young ones, youngsters have a valid complaint against their father in this regard. Thus, once some of them said, "We like Dad, sure we do. But when we have discussions, he never admits to being wrong or having made a mistake. Now, everybody makes mistakes sometimes." I just can't. I just can't. I mean, this is Watchtower all over. They are daddy who makes mistakes and doesn't admit it. This dad may have felt that to hold on to his authority, he should never admit to having made a mistake or having been in the wrong. Whatever the reasoning, his attitude was not one fostering communication and harmony within the family. By taking this ill-advised course, rather than strengthening his authority, he was lowering himself in the eyes of his children. By admitting that at times he had been wrong, he would have shown himself big enough to take the blame for mistakes. This analogy is perfect for Watchtower. Watchtower's daddy, because they see themselves as having authority over all of Jehovah's Witnesses as their little children that they have to guide and tell what to do and control. Watchtower makes lots of mistakes in terms of predictions, flip-flopping doctrine, causing all kinds of harm to their children because of their words and actions. They refuse to admit that they got things wrong because they think it keeps their authority in place. But what it really does, like it says, it lowers them in the eyes of the children, Jehovah's Witnesses. Lots of them leave because they don't admit their mistakes. And they wake up to the fact that Watchtower has done this over and over and over again. Excellent article. I highly advise you read it. Wonderful advice. It really is. Let's move on. Refusing to admit that one has made a mistake is like claiming infallibility. The heads of the world's largest religious organization have for a century claimed that they were infallible, that they did not make any mistake, nor that any popes ever had when speaking officially on matters of doctrine and morals. But more and more voices are being raised within that very same religious organization questioning this claim. Thus, the Roman Catholic Bishop F. Simons at Indore, Indiana stated, and I'm not going to read that long quote, it's just a quote from the Catholic bishop about how they shouldn't claim to be infallible when they make mistakes. They should own it. They should look to the Bible, that the apostles presented evidence for the things that they claim, and so on. And of course, here the Watchtower is trying to cast the Catholic Church in a negative light by saying they don't admit their mistakes. They claim that they're infallible. They should never do that. The Watchtower is correct. No organization, institution, or religion should ever claim to be infallible or in possession of absolute truth. The Watchtower says that the governing body does not claim to be infallible or inspired.
The governing body is neither inspired nor infallible.
And yet, you have to abide by the doctrines they say are true, or you are labeled an apostate. In the Shepherd the Flock of God book, the Elders Rule Book, which is 290 pages long and 70,000 words long, Pharisee much? They say that if someone is not teaching Bible truth, they're an apostate and they get kicked out and shunned. But according to who is this Bible truth? Well, according to what the Watchtower says, the governing body, is what they say. But what if they're wrong, which they have been repeatedly? Why would they be kicked out if the Watchtower admits that the governing body is neither inspired nor infallible? If I disagree with someone who admits that they don't know everything and maybe they're wrong, well, I would think that if someone admits they're not infallible, then they should be open to arguments against their position, right? So if someone says, look, this is what I think is true based on my research and understanding, and they're having a discussion with me, if I know something that proves their position to be incorrect, or maybe even just adjust it a little bit because they're off in some way, I would think that someone who knows that they're not infallible and not inspired of God would admit, oh, you know what? I never thought about that. You're right. But that's not what the Watchtower does. You try to bring a difference in doctrine to the elders. At first, they will counsel you to try to correct your thinking and get you in line with what the governing body says is true. They might do this a couple of times, but if you keep persisting, being like, no, they're wrong about this, and especially if you talk about it to other people who are Jehovah's Witnesses, you will be pulled into a judicial committee. You will be found guilty of apostasy. You will be kicked out, disfellowshipped, and shunned by everyone in the congregation. Even though Watchtower admits the governing body is neither inspired nor infallible. Does that sound like they're abiding by the things they're claiming in this article? Doesn't that make them sound exactly like the Catholic Church, who claimed infallibility? So Watchtower says, oh, no. The governing body is not infallible.
The governing body is neither inspired nor infallible.
But acts as if they are infallible because you can't disagree with them. And to disagree with them would be an act of apostasy because you're going against Bible truth. But you don't have absolute Bible truth because you're not infallible, and you admit this, but you'll kick people out and shun them for not agreeing with you, which means you do think you're inspired and infallible, which makes you both two-faced and hypocritical, especially for calling out another religious organization for doing the exact same thing that you do. And how harmful is this belief that you're infallible and everyone should get in line with what you believe? They quote in the article, the claim to infallibility does incalculable harm to the credibility of the church's teaching authority. It unduly restricts her ability to accept new evidence and makes her the victim and champion of past errors. And that is a quote from Commonweal from September 25th, 1970. So Watchtower quotes an authority that says that to claim infallibility causes massive harm because it causes the institution to refuse to accept new evidence and to make the institution a victim and champion of past errors. Now, what does that mean? It means that Watchtower makes up a doctrine. They think it's true based on their Bible understanding, historical understanding, whatever. They're wrong, but now they can't admit they're wrong. Because if they admit they're wrong, just like they used the daddy illustration, they think they're going to lose authority or credibility in the minds of Jehovah's Witnesses. So rather than admit they're wrong, they just use this, oh, well, it was just new light from God. That's all. It was a new light from God. It makes them have to hold on to past errors. Huge one, shunning. Huge one, covering up of CSA. Sweeping crime under the rug. It's causing massive, incalculable damage, both to Jehovah's Witnesses and to the reputation of the religion and to their finances because they're getting their butt sued off. But they can't go back and say, oh, we were wrong, because they have on record stated they will never change the two-witness rule. And they can't go back and change that without losing massive credibility and face, they think, because they've established themselves as the authority and arbiter of truth on earth, rather than just admitting, look, we're just a group of people trying to figure things out in the Bible, doing our best to teach others, but we welcome other opinions in case we're wrong. Now, the interesting thing about that is that when the religion began, way back before they were called Jehovah's Witnesses, they were called Bible students. And according to Watchtower's own history in the Proclaimer's book, the groups would meet together and discuss and debate truth from the Bible that churches were not teaching. They said the churches were teaching pagan doctrines and ideology and that kind of thing. But that this group of sincere Bible students would come together and debate and try to figure out the truth. Well, I think that's a wonderful way to try and figure out the truth of any situation, of any ideology or religion. You should welcome open and respectful debate and disagreement. You should. That was the foundation from which Jehovah's Witnesses began. But that changed because power corrupts. So once they had this base of power and you had leaders in place who were benefiting from that power, they didn't want to give it up, which means they cannot be seen in their minds, because narcissists are like this, they can't be seen as being wrong, because in their minds, in Daddy's mind, it lessens how they would be viewed if they admit that they're wrong. It removes their authority. But the opposite is actually true, as indicated in their own illustration in this article of the Daddy, that they lose esteem from people because they don't admit they're wrong. So the Watchtower makes this quote from Commonweal that is excellent and true, but in its entire history, it is completely ignored in its own behavior. Let's continue. In striking contrast to the position taken by the popes is that taken by the Christian witnesses of Jehovah. They readily admit to having made mistakes as to doctrine and worship. Do they though? Do they? Thus, for a time, in common with Christendom, they celebrated Christmas until they learned of its pagan origin. Notice this is kind of a backhanded way of claiming to be humble enough to admit your mistakes. What they're saying is, we used to think this thing that everybody else did, but we're so much better than them, so we got rid of that pagan belief. Then again, because Romans 13:1, and here comes the actual admission that kind of surprised me, really. I didn't realize they had actually admitted to being wrong about something. Then again, because Romans 13:1 had been construed to mean that the governments of the world must be given unqualified obedience, the witnesses interpreted the higher powers or superior authorities there mentioned as applying to Jehovah God and Jesus Christ. However, a closer examination of the context revealed that Romans 13:1 does indeed refer to the political governments of the world. But by comparing the scripture with others, such as Acts 5:29, which states, we must obey God as ruler rather than men, it was seen that the subjection mentioned at Romans 13:1 must be a relative subjection, not an unqualified one. That is, Christians are to be in subjection to the governments of this world so long as these do not ask Christians to go contrary to God's laws. When such governments do, then the Christian must obey the higher law. So, semi-kudos to Watchtower for actually admitting that they got a major doctrine completely wrong. Completely wrong. They were absolutely 180 wrong, and they completely turned around. However, notice what it says. It doesn't say that the governing body or the Watchtower got it wrong. How does it say? The witnesses interpreted the higher powers of superior authorities that are mentioned to applying to Jehovah God and Jesus Christ. The witnesses. No, the witnesses only did and believed what the Watchtower and the leaders, the governing body, the writers of the magazine taught them to believe. So, is the Watchtower actually being humble and admitting that they, the leadership, were wrong? No, they're again passing the buck to the witnesses as if the rank and file members of the religion were the ones who came up with that doctrine. No, they didn't. It was the leaders. So you are sort of admitting you're wrong, but you're really actually passing the buck by making it look like you weren't specifically wrong, but we all were as a whole. No, you were. You were wrong. And you don't really admit that, do you? Now, what else don't you do? We're about to find out more good advice from the Watchtower that they don't follow. Here we go. Does this admission of making mistakes stamp them as false prophets? Not at all, for false prophets do not admit to making mistakes. In fact, the book of Acts gives more than one example of early Christians being mistaken as to their beliefs and needing to be set straight, but they are spoken of with approval in God's word. All of this is in keeping with the Bible principle that the path of the righteous ones is like the bright light that is getting lighter and lighter until the day is firmly established. Okay, so being wrong about this doctrine, that may not make you a false prophet because you weren't actually prophesying anything, but you were wrong about 1914, 1925, 1951, and those were the three you were wrong about up till the time this article was written. After this article was written, you were wrong about 1975. You were wrong about this generation not passing away before the end came. You were wrong about the preaching work ending in the year 2000, and here's what's interesting about that. Not only were you wrong in the January 1st, 1989 Watchtower, where you said the preaching work would come to a conclusion by the year 2000, you also changed the writing in that magazine by the time the bound volume came out that year because you knew you were wrong. You tried to hide your mistake rather than just admitting it that you were wrong and that you never should have said that. You modified it. You tried to change the history of your magazine to make it look like you wrote something you did not originally write. Does that sound like someone who admits their mistakes? No. That sounds like a false prophet. That sounds like someone who's making things up as they go along. That does not stick to the principles or the guidelines or advice given in this article at all. It is wildly hypocritical. And we're going to get to another thing the Watchtower should have done in regards to the Romans 13 change that they didn't do in just a second. But let's continue. In view of such examples, why should it be so difficult for individuals to admit to making mistakes? No human knows everything. We all keep learning. Time and again, due to insufficient knowledge, we make mistakes. Or then again, we may make mistakes due to our emotions getting the better of us. We may have let some prejudice or wounded vanity cause us to respond without first using our thinking ability to evaluate the consequences of our words or actions. Interesting. Why should it be so difficult, Watchtower, for you to admit to your mistakes? Just like you say in this article. You don't know everything. We know you don't know everything. You were wrong so many times. So why not just admit, well, we were wrong. We were wrong about this prediction. We were wrong about that prediction. We were wrong about the other prediction. We were wrong about the flip-flopping doctrines. We were wrong about the no blood policy. We were wrong about covering up crime in the congregations. We were wrong about the 2-witness rule. We were wrong about at first saying that you can't have organ transplants and then you can't and then you can again. We were wrong about saying that you can't do any kind of civil service when you're called to war, that you have to go to prison if you're ever enlisted rather than accepting any kind of service to the government. We were wrong, we were wrong, we were wrong, we were wrong, we were wrong. But you never admit that you're wrong. And on the one occasion I've actually seen you do it, you're still passing the buck about who was really wrong and why. Being willing to admit a mistake is the right course, for it leaves one with a clear conscience. It keeps us from being on the defensive or attempting to justify our mistakes by saying, nobody is perfect. Okay, I agree. So, given that, is your conscience clear? Leaders of Watchtower, governing body? Is your conscience clear? It shouldn't be, because you never admit your mistakes. And your form of nobody is perfect is you say, we are not infallible. And yet you enforce your rules through shunning by labeling anyone who disagrees with you as an apostate, as if claiming you're infallible and they can't possibly be right because you must be. You didn't say what they're saying, so they must be wrong. They must be apostates. Let's kick them out and shun them. So aren't you just hiding behind your hypocrisy and lies here? Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. Continues. Being big enough to admit a mistake is also the wise course. Even as noted with the children who complained about their dads not admitting a mistake, by our admitting we made a mistake, we make for better relations with others, be they our fellows, our superiors, or inferiors, that is, organizationally speaking. And by admitting the mistake, it will impress it so on our mind that we will be less likely to repeat that mistake, if for no other reason than because of the humiliation that was involved. First of all, they call other people their inferiors. And then they're like, oh, organizationally speaking, because the Watchtower thinks that they are God's only chosen people on earth. All other religions are from the devil. Everyone else is from the devil. We only have the truth. And yet that truth keeps changing over and over and over again. And we made all these mistakes, but we're not going to admit them. And yet we still think we're superior as an organization to everyone else, which is itself very hubristic and by no means humble and by no means admitting you were wrong. And then it says that you should admit your mistakes if for no other reason than because the humiliation that was involved will stop you from doing it again. Now that's kind of weird though. You're saying that you should be humble and admit that you made mistakes. You're saying that there's nothing wrong with admitting you made a mistake. Like you should do that. Nobody knows everything. But then you're saying that it's humiliating to admit that you were wrong and that will help you not repeat doing that again. Those two things don't jive. Either it's okay to admit you had a mistake, there's nothing wrong with that, or it's humiliating to admit you made a mistake. But if it's okay, it shouldn't be humiliating. So this is definitely a contradiction here. But regardless of that, Watchtower never admits they were wrong. They've been humiliated repeatedly, but they refuse to say it. And they just keep covering it up, covering it up, covering up. New light, some brothers said. They never actually admit that what they did was a mistake that really hurt a lot of people in their religion and caused a lot of people to leave. Final sentence in the article. So, be big. Be big enough to admit a mistake. Be willing to say, yes, that's right. I did make a mistake and I'm sorry. Then try very hard not to repeat it. That's the other piece of advice Watchtower never takes. Has Watchtower ever said, I'm sorry? Has the governing body ever come out and said, we're sorry? We got this wrong. It hurt a lot of people. They've never said that.
Well, knowing this, then, we are not embarrassed about adjustments that are made, nor is an apology needed for not getting it exactly right previously.
They've always said new light, adjustment, change in thinking. Some brothers said, we never said that. Some people misunderstood us. They've never apologized. They don't apologize. In this article, they admit they were wrong about Romans 13. And being wrong about Romans 13 caused some serious repercussions because they would not accept those civil assignments in times of war. And so a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses went to prison because they refused to do that. And that caused major damage to them. They didn't have to go to prison because the doctrine suddenly changed completely. And then it was okay. They could accept civil service. Did Watchtower ever say, I'm sorry for the mistake that they sort of admit, but they say Jehovah's Witnesses got it wrong, not us, Jehovah's Witnesses? No, they don't apologize for that. Did they apologize for flip-flopping on the organ transplant doctrine? No. They used to allow it, and then for a decade they did not allow it. How many people died because they wouldn't take an organ transplant because they thought it was wrong? Because the governing body, the Watchtower, said so. Then, after that 10 years, they flip-flopped right back to where it was okay. It was a matter of conscience. Did they apologize for that mistake? No. They flip-flopped back and forth about the no blood issue. Have they apologized for the harm they caused to people who would not accept certain blood fractions and things because they got it wrong? No. They covered up crime because of the two-witness rule. They've been sued all over the world because of it. They've lost funding from different governments because of it. They've lost their charitable status in different countries because of it. Have they ever apologized for that stance? No, even though they got it wrong. So Watchtower has a wonderful article in the 1972 November 1st Watchtower about being big enough to admit mistakes, and they don't follow a single word of the advice that they give in it. Well, that's what I think anyway, but I would love to know what you think. So be sure to leave your comments below. Don't forget to like this video. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. And remember, if you want to help support the channel, you can click the join button below if you see it, or the link in the video description that will allow you to join the channel, get you some fun perks, and will also help me out a lot. And I really appreciate that. And as always, Thanks for watching.